Good morning, everyone. This is Kevin Robbins, and thank you for joining us for our weekly Recovery and Growth webinar. This is available to both MEA members as well as the business community as part of our efforts to help everybody in our region community kind of deal with this very unique set of circumstances that have been in place since March. We've gone from the shutdown to recovery and growth, which kind of spurts and goes here and there. And today we'll deal with one of the kind of bumps in the road that we see coming up very soon, which is what to do about schools. So thank you for joining us. We are going to get started in a minute or two, and we have a panel, a great panel that's going to help us with the topic for today. Next slide. Before we get into that, though, I just want to let everybody know next Tuesday we will be dealing with another kind of new normal question, which is trends and opportunities in the wellness space. If you're not hearing from your insurance companies yet, there's a pretty much dramatic change in kind of what's available to your employees. Oftentimes included within benefits and what you're already providing. And you're going to hear from our wellness partner that's doing some very innovative activities in that space to help with the health and wellness of your employees, not only from the sickness, but how do we keep ourselves well in this very different environment we're living in. And then August 25th, we're still working out the details on that, but we're looking at the role of managing HR and how technology can help enable everything that you do. Thank you. Next page. Just a reminder, we've been doing online training since the pandemic occurred, live online, but we are back with in-person training. We kicked it off last week and had a great session. Our foundational leadership series, which is really our core supervisor management training, will begin on August 13th. Stress management on August 21st, how to increase performance, quiet the mind, and then the series of programs we have around diversity, inclusion, and civility in the workplace. That's in addition to our unconscious bias, our harassment programs, so really quite a wide variety of activities in that space. So I hope you, if it fits what your needs are, join us for the live training. If not, we have our live online, which you can go to our site to find all the classes upcoming. Thank you. Next page. And we're very excited to announce that we're reopening the Health and Safety Roundtable. I think we mentioned last week we had a tremendous response to the PSO training. I think we trained over 180 people with that, and there was a strong demand to create a recurring environmental health and safety roundtable. So we've added sessions, which you can see here. So we're opening that up to people that would like to join at this point for members. And again, as we have talked about for the last couple of months, health and safety in the workplace are very different with the pandemic. And as we're going to talk a little bit more about today, the impacts are kind of beyond the workplace and extend, and becoming part of that dialogue, I think, is very important for those that are in health and safety or are your company's PSO. Next page. And finally, I'm personally very excited about this. Our HR leadership event on September 1st from 12 to 4. You can see our panel speakers who are amazing. Simon Sinek has a new book out now called Infinity Game, which is really quite fascinating and very relevant to what we're doing. But the theme for everybody here, and it's a wonderful group, is building endurance, agility, and resilience in the workplace. Those of you may be familiar with Patrick Lencioni's book about the dysfunctions of teams. Captain Ron Johnson, it's quite an interesting story, as is Robin Benacasa. So at the virtual event, there will members receive a discount, but this event will also be recorded. So if you can't make it for the entire 4-hour session or would like, we will have the recording available for some period of time. So, encourage all to join. This does receive SPHR and SHRM credits for those who need those, and there's no better way than to listen to these 4 speakers that day. So I hope you can join us for that, and we will send out a link for registration to attendees today. Next slide. As always, I just said that we'll send out the presentation along with the recording. If you do have questions throughout today, please type them in the Q&A or chat. We'll do as best we can to answer those. And then for MEA members, if you have questions following up from this, you can reach out to us either by phone or email to speak with our HR experts or the MEA legal team. So with that, let me turn it over to Amy McAndrew, who is going to be our moderator for today. Amy.
Thank you, Kevin. So thank you all for joining us today for a topic that I know, just based on my discussions with our membership, a topic that is really on everybody's minds as we get closer to Labor Day. So we're really happy today to be joined by Dan O'Meara, an attorney, shareholder at Ogletree Beacons, a national and international labor and employment law firm, and also Karen Goldman, Vice President of Human Resources at JEP Management. Karen is an MEA member and someone who is very knowledgeable about the issues that we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to pick their brains, their thoughts on some of these really important topics. And feel free, as Kevin said, if you have questions, send them in through Q&A or through chat. We'll get to as many of them as we can. And Dan and Karen, at any point, feel free to turn on your cameras. So I want to start just by getting a joint base of knowledge here. So I am, full disclosure, I'm the parent of an incoming college freshman, the parent of a rising 8th grader. And so this is my world right now, both from a professional point of view and also a personal point of view. So I know intimately what all these things mean because I'm reading about them all the time and listening to friends and lamenting sort of about what the fall might bring. But I just thought it'd be helpful to talk about what the different options are out there so that we all sort of start from the same spot. So we've got in-person learning, okay? That appears at this point to be all in-person is being reserved for some of the smaller, mostly private or Catholic schools, at least where I am in the greater Montgomery County area. Those are the schools who I think can manage the social distancing better, and also a lot of the cleaning, upgrades to ventilation, the kinds of things that we're going to need to make this successful. So I think that's a small percentage of the schools that we're talking about. And for those folks, if they have their kids going in person all the time, you know, things have not changed that much, except that after-school programs might be affected. But then we've got virtual and distance learning. This is what we all were doing the second half of March, April, May, and into June, where kids are joining via Zoom in many cases to attend virtual classes with their teachers. In some cases, I have friends whose students were not even doing Zooms. They were just getting assignments uploaded to a website, and the students were expected to work through those assignments by themselves. And then I heard combinations of those two. Students might spend an hour on Zoom with a teacher and then have homework uploaded that they had to work through themselves for the rest of the day. Clearly challenging, especially for smaller kids, for any parent trying to work, certainly if you're trying to work outside the home and you've got you know, kids 12 and younger, that's going to be very challenging. But even if you're trying to work in the home, if you've got a child who's trying to work through homework on their own without a lot of the guidance they would normally get from a teacher, that's going to be very challenging for any parent. And even just the getting kids on and off Zoom can be challenging, especially for those of us who are somewhat technologically impaired. So we've got hybrid learning. And what I'm hearing is this is what a lot of the public schools in southeastern Pennsylvania are doing. In many cases, they're breaking the kids up into groups. One group will go to school part of the week. The other group will go to school the other part of the week. That limits the number of folks who are physically present in the building, which hopefully limits the potential spread of the virus. And many schools are taking one day a week, you know, sometimes Wednesday, to clean in the middle of that. So again, hybrid learning, you're getting your kids into school a couple of days a week, but that creates a huge challenge still for parents, especially of smaller kids. What am I doing for the rest of the week? Or what am I doing when the kids are home and need assistance? There's also been something called pods that have developed. And I don't know how many of you have heard of this. And I'm seeing a lot of this in my community. We're getting groups of parents who are getting together. They might be 4 or 5, maybe up to 10 families, where they're joining together and they're going to school the kids together. So they're going to create their small kind of bubble, right, around the virus so they can limit spread. But then they're going to hire someone, whether it's a college student, a retired teacher, someone to lead the pod, to help with the distance learning, to help with the homework. And, you know, in many ways, that will allow parents to work somewhat normally. But obviously, that's a choice that only people at the upper echelon of the economy are going to be able to afford. Your average $12 an hour worker is not going to be able to afford the pods. And then we've got traditional homeschooling. Some parents were doing this before, teaching their kids themselves. Now we're seeing more parents make the choice to say, well, I'm not happy with any of the options being offered by my school district. I'm just going to homeschool my kids. Right? And that's mutually exclusive. I don't see how you can work outside the home and homeschool your kids at the same time. And one of the great challenges of all of this, of course, is that things may change as time goes on, right? We were just talking before we got on the Zoom about how some schools are delaying their decisions. They're going to make a definitive decision as we get closer to the start of school. And once school starts, it's entirely possible that some schools are going to have an outbreak, and there's going to be a switch, just like we saw in March. The kids are coming home, and so parents are going to need to be able to pivot, and so are employers. So let's talk about, when I turn this over to Dan, what options are out there from a legal point of view? What do you have to do as an employer to accommodate your employees? So Dan, if you could talk to FFCRA and any other laws that might apply.
Sure. Yeah, and appropriate analysis for anyone looking at an individual situation right now is first, what do we have to do? And then whether we have to do it or not, what do we want to do? But let's talk first about what we have to do. All the usual, I'll say, state and local law and federal laws apply, FMLA, New Jersey's Family Leave Act, et cetera. In addition, Congress passed the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which creates two new types of leave specifically applicable in this situation. It was passed March 14th of this year. It's effective from April 1 until December 31. And I think it's lost on no one. It starts on April Fool's Day and ends on New Year's Eve. But the Families First Act applies to employers with fewer than 500 employees, which I think would be most of the people listening in, but excludes large employers. It excludes, even among 500 or fewer employees, excludes healthcare providers as defined in there. It creates two different types of leave. One, EPSL, emergency paid sick leave, which is basically for 2 weeks or 80 hours. And it applies, say, if someone is quarantined because of possible exposure, if they've been advised by a healthcare professional to be quarantined, or if one of their children, for example, is quarantined or advised to be quarantined, and it applies to the time they're waiting for the results. It is paid leave, although there is a tax credit from the federal government for paid leave with caps, a tax credit for any paid emergency paid sick leave. The FFCRA also creates emergency paid medical leave, also known as EFMLA or EFMLEA, which we can just agree on one set of initials for it. But that basically applies, it gives 12 weeks leave if one needs to care for a child who's under 18, whose school is closed, whose daycare is closed, etc. Or if the school isn't closed, if they're operating virtually and the physical school is closed. Again, that's 12 weeks. Weeks 3 through 12 have to be paid at 2/3 pay. But again, this is it's reimbursed by a federal tax credit. In addition, as I mentioned, the FMLA still applies depending on the severity of the symptoms. COVID may be a covered family health or serious health condition, and the FMLA, keep in mind, requires leave for the employee's illness or certain family members' illness to care for them. Another law to be considered is the Americans with Disabilities Act. Obviously applies to 15 or more employers, requires reasonable accommodation of employees. Although it can make someone considered disabled based on a family member's disability or impairment, it does not require an employer to reasonably accommodate the disability of a family member. So you may have a child who's disabled, and for that reason, you need an accommodation. The ADA itself does not require that. Leave or other accommodation may be required under some of these other laws, but not under the ADA. So that's the basic legal framework. One last thought before I turn it back over to discuss the HR issues and what we want to do. There was a decision out of the federal court in Manhattan on August 3rd, 8 days ago, that invalidated large parts of the Department of Labor regs on the FFCRA. What do we do about that? Does it mean we can't rely on them anymore? It's not clear that you should do anything differently. The decision may just apply to New York employers. The decision may be appealed to the Second Circuit. But at the minimum, if an employer has been acting based upon these DOL regs that were in fact final before they were validated, you will likely have a shield from any monetary penalties based upon your good faith reliance on these regs. So a lot of employers are not modifying their practices at all. Should an employer modify the practices on a go-forward basis as the decisions you make? You'll need to make that in consultation with counsel. Some employers are, some employers are not. So that's a little more complicated than I like it to be, but that's the nest of laws we're dealing with right now.
Thanks, Dan. So we've gotten a couple of questions chatted in that we've heard a lot here at MEA, so I'd love to get your take on it. So we've got the, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and some other states have instituted this 14-day quarantine if you travel to certain states. And so the question is, if we have an employee who goes on vacation to one of these states, South Carolina, Florida, and they come back, and then they have the 14-day quarantine, is that covered by FFCRA? Now, the way I'll tell you how I've come out, but I'd love to hear if you have a different thought on it, because I know Sherman and I don't necessarily agree on this one. The way FFCRA is worded, if you are ordered by the government to quarantine, you get FFCRA. In Pennsylvania and New Jersey, at least, these are not orders, they are guidances or suggestions. So what I've told employers is that FFCRA probably doesn't apply. Now, worst case scenario, you give the FFCRA and you don't get the tax credit. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on what Ogletree is telling its clients.
No, let's, at least in one situation recently, where a Pennsylvania employer raised exactly that issue. Someone had gone to one of the quarantine states rather voluntarily, came back, said, by the way, I'm in that state. Do I get my leave now? That client was advised, consistent with what you said, which is that the Pennsylvania order is voluntary in that regard as the quarantining, and the FFCRA applies to required quarantines. So we concluded in that case anyway that it was not a FFCRA qualifying event.
Okay. Thank you for that. At them, and we'll get to them as we can. I just want to take a minute to point something out here, because as we all know, as this pandemic has been going on, there's been another really big piece of the news over the last several months, and that's the social justice movement. And as part of that social justice movement, we're all talking more about diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And so I think it doesn't feel right to me to let this conversation go by without acknowledging that this is an issue that's going to disproportionately affect women. I've given you some quotes here. More and more women are leaving their jobs to stay home, to care for their kids, to teach during this time. And I think as employers, we care deeply about diversity in the workplace. So this becomes not just an issue of retaining employees that we've already recruited and trained, right? It also becomes an issue about diversity, because if we have a percentage, even a significant percentage of our female employees leaving because of this, it's going to really affect the diversity of our workplaces. So I think we really have three main questions that we should be asking ourselves right now. I'm sure there are more, but for purposes of this discussion today and our limited time, I really think it's these three questions. It's, can we as employers offer flexibility at work? That's flexibility around when and how the work gets done. Can we offer flexibility from work? That's leave and time off. And can we offer caregiving programs, subsidized care, access to caregiving resources? Because any one of those three things, or maybe a combination of those three things, will support our parents at work and allow them to continue to be productive employees. So I wanted to sort of talk to Karen, because she's in the trenches. She is an HR professional. And so start with the first question. How about, what can you sort of talk to Karen about offering flexibility at work?
So, I think when we think about this, the solutions may be the same or they may be different depending on if your workforce has to be at work at the physical job site, or if they can work from home. I think that there are different solutions for different populations, but the thought process would be the same. First of all, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but finding out, what the constraints are that are facing your particular employees. And looking at schedules for people who are on site, especially. Can you modify the shifts in any way? Can you people come in late and leave early if that helps them, or come in early and leave early? Compressing, expanding, splitting. I mean, there used to be in a lot of environments something called a split shift, where you worked, early morning and then you kind of went home for some period of time and then you came back later. Obviously that's not appealing to a lot of people, but in this situation, it might be a solution. We are seeing compressed work weeks for a lot of reasons, for childcare reasons, but also to maximize the number of days where nobody's in the building in case we did have a COVID outbreak. I mean, we've had a few potential situations where we are running at that point, we're running a 3-day shift. So the last time the person was in the office was Thursday, and then the next time they were in was Tuesday. So that gave us a nice comfort level if somebody did present Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. But anyway, I don't want to digress on that too much, but that could be a solution. Job sharing, reduced hours, bundling work differently, or restructuring the job was one that came up in a session that I did with some MEA peers that I hadn't thought of before, and my management team really kind of took to it, which is there a way to break up a job and bundle pieces of it so those pieces can be done on an off shift, on a weekend, or even at home? Where if you're a manufacturer, is there kitting work that can be done with smaller components that could be done at home, maybe not full time, but a couple of days a week? If you're not a manufacturer like us, maybe there's other ways. If you've got a call center, maybe there are things that a call center does, taking calls, but maybe they do other types of work, and can you shift those other types of work reasonably and fairly to the people who can't be readily accessible on the phone, but it's still valuable work? Of course, telework is the big, seemingly the big solution, right? The solution that seems to solve all problems until you get to the issue of, can people telework full-time and care for their children or educate their children full or part-time, and where does that suffer? I would love to hear if anybody else is doing anything creative that I
add in, or to send in through Q&A if you've got something creative that you're doing that we haven't talked about. I'd love to share that with the group. And Dan, how about your clients? Are you hearing anything creative around the ideas of flexibility at work other than what Karen shared?
Nothing I can think of. I think Karen's list was pretty exhaustive. I saw a SHRM study that said 42% of employers have a dedicated plan for employees with childcare responsibilities. I'm not sure what they mean. I think they mean a formalized policy. Those policies are much more common in the knowledge industries, as they define it, less common in physical industries, which I think means manufacturing. Other what I thought interesting components of the SHRM study, as to addressing childcare accommodation requests, 59% of the responding employers said they were going to take on a case-by-case basis. 7% said they were going to deny all such requests. I don't get the logic there, but the most common responses to these requests or practices, flexible hours with 86% was the highest, full-time remote 71% was the next, and reduced hours was 63% was next. Least popular among employers in this study anyway were things that dealt with what they called direct costs. 9% of the employers were giving subsidies to parents with child care obligations, and 7% were providing on-site child care.
Okay, we will talk a little bit more about that. So someone is asking, and I think you talked about this a little bit, Dan, is, FFCRA is only 12 weeks, and there are many folks who have already exhausted that time back in March. A lot of folks ran through the 12 weeks. So two issues around that. First of all, if your school is not physically closed, right, FFCRA is not going to apply at all. But what if you've already run through the 12 weeks? Have you heard anything? Because I know I haven't yet. Have either of you heard anything about the possibility of Congress extending FFCRA and adding additional weeks?
I haven't heard anything, and the Congress is having trouble deciding on anything right now. What I have heard is a lot of employers saying, well, even if you've exhausted the bare minimum, we have no desire to be firing people because they can't return to work in the way we want. And employers are taking it on an individual case basis based on the perceived sincerity of the request, based on the value of the employee. But I've talked to some employers who, working with me, said, well, let's toss out the old rule book and do practices that make sense in this very unique, extraordinary time. And in a lot of cases, that means you've exhausted your leave. We're going to keep you on payroll. We're going to keep you on healthcare benefits. Whether they get paid or not is another thing. But in a lot of cases, they are keeping them on some type of pay too.
So the thing that I would add to that, because we faced this issue with when people ran through their FFCRA rate from the beginning, and we had to look at it this summer. It's important to know your benefits contracts and whether you can keep people on who aren't working. It seems that health insurers don't care so much. As long as they're getting the premium, they don't care. But your ancillaries, especially your life insurance carriers, may have very strict rules about that. And that's what we ran into, where they would not let us extend past 12 weeks. And we ran the risk, if we didn't then terminate people and somebody did have a life insurance claim, the claim wouldn't be covered because they weren't terminated and given an opportunity to convert. So you definitely want to talk to your brokers about that. It's sometimes one of those don't ask, don't tell situations, but I don't mess around with life insurance because I don't want to end up, paying a claim. So, one idea that I've floated and that we've looked at is, when you run out of the 12 weeks, is there a way to keep the employment relationship in a sort of no man's land status, like an unpaid, non-benefited leave, but if you come back within a certain period of time, your service is bridged? Kind of one step before termination. It's not great because people need benefits, but it is one thing to think about.
And Karen, just to expound on one thing Karen said, as of what I'll call the insurance coverage issue, the hazard an HR professional takes for their company when they're a little bit too generous, when someone within the confines of is not supposed to be covered by the life insurance policy, they haven't worked enough hours in the preceding period. That person, in the tragic event they die, and the insurance carrier figures out that they were not supposed to be covered, what the insurance carrier is typically within its rights doing is returning all the premiums, small though they are, to the employer and saying the $150,000 death benefit, whatever it is, the employer pays that out now. So basically, the employer in that situation where the ducks are not in a row ends up self-insuring for the death benefit. The mere fact that the carrier takes the premiums doesn't protect the employer. So it's the concerns Karen expressed are very well founded.
And I think, one of the things that I'm seeing in some of the questions here, how much do we have to really work with people? How much do we, well, you don't at all, really. If someone has exhausted their FFCRA and they can't meet your attendance policy, you could terminate as an employer. I just don't know that that's where we want to be. You've expended time, money, and energy recruiting these folks, training these folks, put aside any moral obligation you might have to people. You put a big investment into these folks, and I just think that most employers are going to want to keep good people at this time, and people that they've already trained. All right, so let's move to the second one. We talked about FFCRA. What about flexibility from work? Is there anything that either of you are seeing that's creative? We talked about the furloughs. We talked about the maybe putting someone in kind of a limbo status, as Karen talked about, if they can come back with a certain amount of time. Anything else you're seeing out there?
Some people are kind of creating their own FFCRA type benefit, or additional PTO, specific. So then the question, we have to answer is it available to anyone? Or is it only if you have, how narrowly can you tailor it? How narrowly should you tailor it? Is it only if a person has exhausted their PTO? And then they get, so, the big challenge a lot of us are having is people would rather get 100% pay people would rather be on unemployment in some cases than take PTO. They may want to do that rather than take a company-based FFCRA, which would be at the 2/3 pay, or most likely be at the 2/3 pay. So those are definitely options to just decide how much can you afford and how narrowly do you want to tailor it.
And again, if anybody out there has a creative solution, we'd love to hear you through Q&A or through chat. Okay, so how about the third question? And I did get a question around childcare subsidies. What are, Dan, you did mention this briefly, I think it was Dan. What are we seeing around, helping employers find childcare or subsidizing their childcare? Who wants to take that first?
I'll speak briefly to it. I have not seen a lot of clients I work with adopting these programs for the first time. But as I said, the SHRM study shows it's out there. 7% of employers have done so. Maybe they're pre-existing programs, but they're actually 9% offer some type of subsidy, and then 7% actually offer the childcare on site. It's not a common thing, but God bless it if you can make it work. And I think I can't speak to the tax. You can get a tax preferred status for these programs and the subsidies in some cases. If you cross all the T's and dot the I's, you might have to create a special benefit plan for it, but I think it's achievable.
So as I was thinking about this for my company, I looked at, I'm looking away because I had some things pulled up on my other screen. I kind of organized it for myself into a cost continuum, with the lowest cost or free things being, creating a hub for people for just either you post to it or people can share apps, websites, community and school district provided options, and just a general sharing of ideas. So I know some companies use Slack, some companies use Paylocity Chat. There may be places that you can either using your existing coronavirus information hub or setting up something specifically for people to share ideas, or even share, my college student is going to be home and is looking to babysit. So those are sort of the no cost options. I have noticed a lot of schools working to provide solutions or hubs for their, at least in our area, for parents. The local next door Facebook groups, moms groups, dads groups. So, as part of it, we will encourage employees who may not normally be that interested in being on community. Moving on the continuum, many of us have EAPs. Either we have full-blown EAPs or we have mini ones that come with our life insurance. I think there's probably a huge range of what the EAPs are offering. Ours is offering telephonic counseling to help people, direct people to resources. Some may be online only. Then we've got the referral services. So starting to think about how can we spend some money to help people help themselves. There are, digital and app-based referral services, care.com. I think most people have heard of their membership services, right? So care.com in particular is offering a employer-sponsored care.com membership, basically. So the employer would pay the membership to care.com for its employees. There are other companies, and I have a lot of windows open because I didn't want to just talk about care.com, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move on from that. Then there are, further along, there's more of a concierge model, which, that helps a person develop a customized plan, will potentially, depending on how fancy the concierge is, contact providers to see if they're accepting new children, help tailor the universe of options to the specific situation of the employee. So we've got some companies, there's Wealthy, Caraloop, Bright Horizons. I can provide the list or a graphic that my broker had shared with me. Those, I don't have costs on either of those options. I've requested quotes for my companies. The thing about those is they are on a per employee per month basis, so you're going to pay for it whether the employees use it or not. So if you don't have a high concentration of employees in this situation, that might not be the right solution for you. Then we get into, you know, paying for backup childcare or subsidized childcare on site or near site. So Dan mentioned, I'll pause and see if there's any comments before I talk about Section 139 plans.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so Dan mentioned some tax favored ways to potentially subsidize childcare or give people compensation, some form of subsidy for disaster related expenses. So I'm not an expert, I'm not a tax person, I'm not a lawyer. I'm discovering this just like everybody else is. But in my research, my broker and I talked about this little known tax code called Tax Code Section 139B. So they had told me about the Section 139 plan, and I thought maybe they meant a 125 plan or a 129 plan, dependent care plan, but no, there is a separate type of tax favored status for qualified disaster relief payments. And they can include any amount paid to an individual or for the benefit of an individual to reimburse or pay reasonable or necessary personal, family, living, or funeral expenses incurred as the result of a qualified disaster. By President Trump issuing the proclamation declaring COVID-19 a national emergency, the IRS has determined and confirmed that expenses associated with COVID-19, with certain exceptions, would qualify under a Section 139 plan. So under that type of a plan, you don't have to have a plan document, but any expert is going to suggest that you do, and the plan document would list the types of expenses that you'll pay, the amount you're willing to pay, the method for seeking reimbursement, the duration of the program, defining eligibility, and an explanation of the purpose. Supposedly, Section 125 cafeteria plan administrators, FSA administrators, some of them do offer this plan, to administer a plan for you. They'll, check the box, set up, that kind of thing. We check with our FSA vendor and they do not. So we're checking with our HSA vendor who also does FSA. So far I've been striking out. But to me, this is the most interesting opportunity, depending on how narrowly we can tailor this. Maybe it's only $50, who knows, but it's something that we can do to get tax-free.
Yeah, sounds like an interesting approach. Absolutely. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on to sort of the next question. We did have a specific question on this. What are the potential pitfalls here? And Dan, I'm going to ask you to speak to this specifically. Let's say I've got 2 employees, a male and a female. I really like one better than the other, so I want to accommodate them, but I don't want to accommodate the other one. Potentially, am I setting myself up for some sort of a discrimination claim? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you are, and it's a risk worth taking. It's the short answer. Anytime you distinguish between one employee and another, you could have any variety of claims. Let's say even a national origin discrimination claim. But we're seeing incredibly few EEOC charges or state agency charges filed during this pandemic. Maybe they're being filed and we aren't getting notice of them. We're seeing very few. I think people know we're in a pandemic. So I would, if you've got rational reasons that are lawful reasons, like we like this employee better, we think this employee has more long-term promise for the organization, so we accommodated that employee, we didn't accommodate another one. That's an explanation of work by me. And I should say my overall philosophy in dealing with issues in this pandemic is don't let these possible charges distract you from what you think is the right thing to do in the situation. The fact that you've never done something before doesn't mean you shouldn't do it now. The fact that in 2 years, somebody might say you did it back in 2020 for that employee, do it for me now. Don't let that stop you, because hopefully we'll be out of the pandemic by then, and we aren't right now. So if there's something that you think is consistent with fairness to employees, containing the spread of the virus and pursuing your organization's mission, just do it. And if you emerge on December 31st this year with having met your customers' needs, advanced your mission, you're not in bankruptcy, and you have few EEOC charges on your desk, you get an A+ for pandemic survival.
Yeah, and I would definitely say, I see what Dan is saying, certainly, but before you don't make those decisions in a vacuum. Talk to your employment attorney, definitely, so you can weigh the proper risks and make sure that the risk worth taking. Okay, so one other question around potential pitfalls before I move to the last piece. What about productivity? I'm getting this question, I know, from a lot of our members. How do I know that people are being as productive as they can be when they're working from home? I feel like maybe they're not fully engaged on all the Zooms, and maybe they're, when I try to call them at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they're not there. You have any thoughts on that, Karen, about can we be measuring productivity, and should we?
So, this is the $1 million question. I think people looked at productivity a little bit differently during the kind of, wow, we're all doing something we've never done before period. And now if we're moving more into this is the way we're going to do things for a while, I think the answer might be different. A knowledge economy or knowledge jobs are hard to measure productivity because there's no widgets. It's not about how much time you spend, and none of us ever get all our work done. So should you still hold people accountable to goals? Yeah, I think you're going to have to work harder at defining what the job is supposed to deliver. But that's probably true anyway. That was probably true even when we were all in the office, and this is just bringing it to the fore. Can you, measure hours worked like you did before? Well, probably, because you can have people log on and you can have people use apps on their, their payroll, even if they're exempt employees, if you want to track that and see what's happening. So I think, yeah, we're going to have to measure something, whether it's productivity in the traditional sense. That's going to be, I think, harder to do for most work from home jobs.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, and just move to this last piece here. What we're hearing from a lot of, I think we probably have all seen this meme right now. It's not that I'm working from home, I'm living at work, right? If I'm teleworking. So how do we make sure that our employees still stay engaged, and how do we avoid the burnout? I think one of the things that we should really be thinking about, and thinking about it now, think about it in August, not in September, is what about a survey, even a quick Survey Monkey, to talk to our employees about what their challenges are and what their needs are and how we can help them meet those needs would be a really good thing to be doing right now. I also think that the idea of leading by example is really important, for managers to be showing their own vulnerability if they have caregiving needs, whether, and it doesn't have to be kids right now, it could also be aging parents. A lot of us are dealing with that as well. Dealing with it too. I might have to miss a Zoom every once in a while because my kid's got, homework that needs help with, at the same moment that we're trying to have a Zoom. I think that's helpful to your employees to let them know what's going on. Obviously training for your managers, because you've got plenty of managers out there whose kids are grown or who don't have kids, and they can't relate at all to what is going on right now. So I think that's important too, to make sure they know what's going on. Karen, can I hand it off to you to cover a few of these last ones?
Sure. Actually, in preparing for this, we did do some brainstorming of a list, and One of the things that struck me is the idea of recording meetings so people can listen later if it's a meeting that doesn't require the person to actually be contributing to. You know, tapping in or creating parent support groups, either internally or externally. For me, it's constantly pushing back on the assumption that people are fine. You know, for right now, most of my work from home people seem to be fine. People are, my team is telling me that they're okay, that they either have other caregivers at home or whatever, but I don't want to rely on that, because being fine today doesn't mean they're going to be fine in October when there's no after school activity. So I think constantly checking in with people, knowing who your people are who aren't going to speak up unless asked.
Agreed.
Resources, EAPs, you know, putting things in front of people on a periodic basis, because they may be fine one day and reach a different point. I think most of us have cycled through, whether we have kids or not. Some weeks we're fine and some weeks we can't pull ourselves out. Can I just make one plug before we go?
Absolutely.
Please be kind to teachers and administrators. I know that this is an HR group and we're generally kind people, but some of the stuff that my friends that are teachers are seeing written online about teachers right now, if you see it, it's bullying. Please, everybody, let's try to be kind. And if we see bullying, let's do what we need to do to stop it, because that's what we do. We know how to do it probably better than most people in the public. So. Thank you for putting that plug. I was stunned when I heard that what people are facing and reading. Everyone's trying to do their best, just like we are.
Yeah, absolutely. Any closing thoughts, Dan?
No, I just agree that be kind to the teachers, and I'm sometimes stunned by the level of crude discourse out there, which I think has gotten worse as the pandemic has gone along. And I agree. I think at employers across the board, there's a certain work from home burnout that's going on. I don't know if it's summertime. I don't know if it's because this has lasted longer than we thought. But a lot of employees who are very engaged 3 months ago are less engaged now. And if it continues to September, I don't know what employers should do, but continuing on that course is probably not going to be the way to go.
Right. And I think one of the great challenges is going to be that the rules will probably change around schooling. A lot of kids may start school, right around Labor Day, but how long that continues and in what way definitely can change. So the more that you can be flexible as an employer, I think, like I said, you really want to retain these employees that you've spent time, money, and energy recruiting and training. They're valuable folks. So, but this has been a great discussion. I know there was much more that we could have gotten into, but we definitely ran out of time, which is always a good sign that we had a good discussion. So for those of you who are NEA members, there were a couple of questions we couldn't get to, let us know on the hotline, talk to Member Legal Services. We're happy to talk to you more. And we've got a lot of good resources on the NEA webpage as well, to the extent that you want to go there and poke around. And I'll give one more plug always. If you haven't spent 5 minutes this week on the CDC's webpage, I think you should spend 5 to 10 minutes there every week if you can. Stuff is changing all the time. Poke around. They've got some really good stuff there. So thank you so much, Dan. Thank you so much, Karen, for joining us today. And we'll see you guys next week.